All right, welcome back. So this is the first actual video where we're going to talk about some books. And for this first time around, I had the idea of photo books made in a day. Now, I'm not talking about editing and sequencing and having it bound. That would be very difficult to do in a day. I think you could probably make some digital photos and go to FedEx and get them printed and stapled and distribute that, but that's not what we're talking about. I'm talking about a book where the photography, the work was done in the span of a single day. And in some cases, the work then came out, years later as an actual book. So we're going to talk about two books today. The first is RFK Funeral Train by Paul Fusco, and the second will be Confederate Moons by Gregory Halpern. So in general in these videos, I'm going to try to not be on camera too much. So after the intro where I talk about what the subject is going to be, I'm going to try to switch to the books as soon as possible. So let's switch views right now and get right to the books. Okay, so here's the first book we're going to talk about today, which is RFK Funeral Train. And before we get into it, I just want to kind of talk about some of the ideas that are going to come up as we look through these books. I was thinking a lot about this idea of photo books made in a day, or photography projects, bodies of work made in a day. And I was thinking, what is it? What are the attributes of something, of a photography project made in such a short amount of time that make it work, that make it stand alone as something complete? And one thing I realized looking at these two books is there has to be a beginning, a middle, and an end, some kind of arc. Now, that doesn't necessarily need to be the exact way that the book is sequenced, and especially with Gregory Halpern, it's not sequenced that way. But I think that underlying movement, an arc in the subject matter is important. And then I think, the other thing, as someone who is a photographer looking at a body of work like this, I think to myself, this is not the kind of thing that you can plan ahead of time. And I would say certainly for this, I can't speak as much to Halpern's work, but this was not imagined that it was going to be a book or a well-known body of work when it was made. Paul Fusco was just photographing, trying to get something from this event. And I feel like to make something like this work, you have to do that. You have to be in the moment. You have to just make the work that you're feeling compelled to make. And then afterwards, it might turn out that there is something in the work that makes it, more meaningful, that it doesn't need anything to be added to it. And then both of them have a level of detail and specificity to them that allow them to transcend just that moment. So even though both of these are taking place at a specific time, a specific known event, they speak to something more universal. And I think that's the other important part. Otherwise, to me, it's just kind of like journalism if you're just talking about an event that happened. But both of these books, I think, transcend that because they're hitting on something deeper. Okay, so we'll take a look in the book, and I'll talk a little bit about the origins of this work. It's copy signed. I always forget that until I open it. I never met Paul Fusco. But the basic origins of this book were when Robert F. Kennedy, who was a senator from New York at that time, in June of 1968, he was running for the Democratic nomination for president. He was assassinated in LA, and a few days later had his funeral service at St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York. And then there was a funeral train that was going to bring his body to Washington, D.C., to Arlington for the burial. And so these photos were all made on that train. Now, Paul Fusco later was in Magnum, but at the time that this work was made, he was working for Look magazine, which was one of those picture magazines like Life that were super popular in the 60s. And I think he was covering the funeral, and then his editor was like, get on that train, figure out a way, and just make sure you're on there. So he gets on the train, he finds a seat. Suddenly they popped out on the other side in New Jersey and saw the crowds lining up everywhere along the side of the track. And immediately he started photographing the people that were lined up, the people that were waiting, the people that were there to send off the train and to mourn, and that became the work. This train, because of the number of people that were lined up, often end up having to stop. It was going extremely slowly, and so it ended up taking something like 9 hours. I think, if I remember correctly, they left New York City about 12:30 and got to DC at like 9 or 9:30 p.m. And it was a Saturday, I think June 8th, 1968. So there were a lot of people that were out. So this first picture, as someone who grew up in the Northeast, immediately the thing that strikes me here is the light. If you've ever spent time in the Northeast in the summer, there's something about these like hazy summer days where it's not cloudy per se, but the sky is just sort of white and it's super hazy and humid. And as soon as I saw this picture, I could just feel it. I see all the people kind of in shorts and stuff, which was less common in those days, and just that white, bright sky and that flat light, but it's clearly daytime. It's like I can almost feel the humidity in the air. And actually, part of the reason I bring that up is what's interesting about this book is throughout, I feel like a lot of that narrative arc, a lot of that progression is told through the light. And again, it's not completely linear, it changes, but you'll see over time the light really shows the progression of time. So in these early pages, these are clearly kind of like urban type of environments, more densely populated, inner city. This is one of the more well-known pictures. I think Magnum actually did a square print of this a few years ago. But it's kind of iconic. So there's another interesting aspect to this that comes out as something technical, but I think really adds to the work and how it comes through. From what I remember reading about this, he was shooting this on Kodachrome and Ektachrome. I think the film speeds were like ASA 64 and maybe 160. So pretty slow film, which was fine in daylight, although they were moving. But as the day progresses and the light starts to leave a little bit, his shutter speed is starting to increase. And there's an interesting thing that's happening with the blur, where it's this kind of like rotational thing. And not to get too in the weeds technically, but I think what's happening is, he's focusing on somebody in the frame, sometimes up close, sometimes a little further back. And as the train is moving, the camera, he's following that person with the camera and turning. And so what ends up happening is that at a slower shutter speed, whatever he's focused on, that like pivot point, stays pretty sharp because the relative motion isn't that much. But then everything around it, because the camera is turning as the train goes by, everything around it gets this like motion blur. And so in a lot of these pictures, it creates sort of like a swirl. So there's like a central focal point, somebody that he's like noticed that becomes the focal point of the picture, and then this kind of environment swirling around them. And you'll see as we get to the end of the book that gets really intense, and I think that really adds to atmosphere and kind of the feeling that these photos bring across. This idea of like chaos, that this assassination was a trauma, and it, he wasn't necessarily the front runner in terms of the Democratic primary from what I remember, but he was building momentum, and it also was another Kennedy killed, and so there was definitely this feeling of like, and Martin Luther King also had been assassinated only a few months before, and so I think this feeling of like, what's going to happen to the country, and of course the summer of 1968 ended up being quite traumatic with protests and demonstrations, and a lot of parallels really to our time now, and I think even though it's a technical thing, I think that swirling kind of feeling, that sense of chaos, really adds to that feeling and describes it. So here you see the same thing is happening. He is centered, both his focus and his kind of pivot on this person here, and everything else becomes blurred around it from the motion. And then there are photos where there isn't as much movement. I think the train actually did stop quite a few times completely so that people could, pay their respects and mourn and look. It's also interesting, sometimes there are these more like organized groups that are greeting the train, and then there's people who clearly made it, a trip and made an effort to come out and see the train, and then there's people who it was just their summer Saturday, and they're like, oh, the train's coming, we should probably go see it. I love this guy, the way the curls of his hair are caught in the light, and how he's standing forward of everybody, these pants that have like paint on them. And again, you see that kind of swirl around him. It's really interesting, keeps coming back. The other thing that I think about a lot with these pictures is the specificity and the detail. The people that Paul Fusco chose to focus on, there's often something understated but interesting about them, whether it's the hair, whether it's the clothing, and it's so specific, it's so of that time, and yet I think that level of detail, the fact that you kind of get to explore, what people's clothing look like, what people's hair looks like, all those things, I think actually makes it more universal because they feel like real people. This isn't just some, group of photos of some other time in the past. It feels real, it feels present, I think because of how specific and detailed. He wasn't looking for just kind of like symbols. He was looking at real people and allowing them to kind of come through the pictures, which I think that's what has led to the longevity of this body of work. A lot of people holding small children, and this kind of like generational relationship keeps coming up. This picture is really interesting because again you have that pivot point, but it's a little further back. It's actually these two. I love this pair here against that pole, and again how just this like crowd is kind of swirling around them. And then also just all the expressions, there's people who are kind of more casual, just came to see something. There's people who are clearly more upset and mourning, and sort of everything in between. It really kind of runs the gamut of emotional reactions to this kind of event. Again, such a great detail that this older couple, presumably their children, they brought flowers to greet the train. Another great subject. This girl feels like she was just having her summer Saturday. It wasn't necessarily the plan to come see this train, and yet here she is, and she's just solemn and intense and focused, and I don't know, just again, the way that she's described, the way that she's shown, her gesture, her posture, it just feels real, it feels present. A lot of the photos have this interesting element as well, which is these kind of like groups of people that are all doing different things. On this family here, you have this family, and I'm assuming this person is with them, but she's really moved and is kneeling down in a prayer. This family, this lone girl with the pigtails just kind of hanging out in the middle. These two men, there's all these like photos where there's two men in white shirts just sort of standing and chatting, and then this family here, I don't know, it's just fascinating the way that some of these frames are organized. The gestures are really fascinating too, what people are doing with their hands. This guy again, kind of like a prayer almost, but not quite. The way his fingers are sort of together gently. That woman with her clasped hands, this guy with his camera. It's going to go back and forth a little bit, but now you can see it's getting a little bit later in the day. I think these people are also a bit farther away. I don't know if this is with a telephoto lens, but the blur is becoming more prominent. You can see it's kind of more this bluish, subdued light. This is also interesting. I think it's the only time it happens in the book that you have the same group that's shown in two photos. And that adds this sense of motion, and it's kind of actually increasing the momentum. Like as we're going, it feels like we're going faster towards something. I love this one. It's just, again, I feel like if you've ever spent time in the Northeast, this backyard, like that light in the summer coming through in the late afternoon, it's just so evocative of a time of the year and a place. And then again, this is like, these people are kind of just enjoying their summer Saturday, but heard that the train was coming and set up their chairs and are ready to watch it, like from the comfort of the backyard. Here's another one, and again, that pivot point is not always in the center of the frame, but Fusco clearly noticed her, and her expression is so good. She's like, almost looks angry, but I think she's just so like somber and serious. But that just becomes the focal point. I love the way the light hits her hair, and even though there's some great details elsewhere in the picture, like the baby here, this woman, there's people's feet there, but again, I love the way that the photo centers on her and then it's just kind of spinning around her. This is another great detail, the girl with the cast on her arm. And this is also the vibe of, they were just out to the lake or something on their summer Saturday, and then it's like, oh, the train's coming, we should probably go see it. So this is more casual kind of interaction with it. Maybe a big sister with a little sister is what it looks like. I love this guy, very solemn, very serious. Again, guy in a white shirt just sort of hanging out in the background. Another girl who probably didn't get out of bed that morning thinking she was going to go see RFK's Funeral Train, just sort of doing her summer thing. But you can see more of these now have some motion blur. It's getting later in the day. The light's changing. More blur. More chaos. Love what's going on here. Their hair is amazing. Just the circle of hands, the way they're all interconnected here. The dog in her arm. Yeah, this family's great. Also his gesture, and it's just really fascinating. Each photo has so much to it that you can look at. What a gesture on this guy. Holding the flower in his mouth. Another one here. The way he's dressed. And then again, you notice that initial focal point, but then your eye starts to wander. It starts to kind of move in a circle because of that blur, that swirling. And you see this beautiful gesture here, the way that this couple is interacting. And this kid in the front here has crossed arms. And this kind of hipstery, artsy looking person here with the camera. And that gesture and that gesture. The clothes, I mean, it's just so interesting. Love this duo on the motorcycle. This is another pretty well-known one. You can see we're kind of getting into maybe more rundown areas, a little bit more poverty, people who are maybe more down and out. Okay, this photo. This is probably my favorite photo in the whole book. And actually, I'm going to try to zoom in on this because it's just too good. We got to take a look at it. Okay, this photo, I mean, I don't even know where to start. First of all, we're in that real late afternoon light. We're obviously somewhere rural. So it's kind of, heading towards the end here. And I don't know, this family is just amazing. I mean, first of all, the way that they lined up in height order. the parents look like they could have walked out of a Walker Evans photo. I mean, the way that they're dressed and their hair, it looks like it could be the 1930s or the 1960s, just kind of timeless. And then, you know, even though they're all kind of in sort of ragged, dirty clothing, the fact that they came out and are waiting solemnly in a line, all at attention to see this train and to kind of pay their respects. And I would say probably from about here, I don't think the kids even know, you know, really or have an appreciation of what this is about. And yet, you know, they're obeying their parents and they're here and they're engaged and taking it seriously. I don't know, there's something so intense and beautiful about this picture. All right, let's zoom back out here. Okay, so the last few pictures are kind of like this. Now, this is getting towards the end of the ride, and clearly the shutter speed has gotten very slow, and now the swirl is almost the whole picture. I'm going to just skip ahead to this last one. I think this is the last picture, yeah. So this one's pretty well known as well. And again, this one has now become all swirl. It's still operating on the same principle. You know, I think he's trying to focus on that person, but by this point, the motion blur is just, you know, taking over the whole picture. But I think that this picture really is, I don't know, symbolic of the whole project and the whole idea of what's going on. You know, this thing, it's not just about a train going from New York to DC. It's about, you know, a loss of hope. It's about grief. It's about, you know, the end of an era. It's about confusion and uncertainty. And so this woman who is there and is clearly present, and you can almost see her looking at you and making eye contact, and yet she's just like kind of consumed by this swirl of chaos, I think, you know, is really symbolic of what this moment felt like for a lot of people. And again, it's something, you know, it was taken on that day and in relation to a specific event, but I think it's such a universal picture. It addresses so much more, and it's just as relevant now. And I think that's what makes it special, and I think that's what makes this whole body of work special. And that's it. There's a little afterword and a quote, and that's it. That's the whole book, RFK Funeral Train, Paul Fusco. Okay, so this is the next book that I want to talk about, which is Confederate Moons by Gregory Halpern. And these are photos that were made on August 21st, 2017, during what I think was called something like the Great American Eclipse, which at that time was the first eclipse in 99 years that went across the whole continental U.S. Since then we had another one now last year. And the pictures were made in North and South Carolina, so there's an area kind of along the border between the two where the eclipse passed through, so I'm assuming he was around there. I don't know exactly where these pictures were taken. There's a quote from him that I've read where he says, "I was fascinated by the idea that the entire nation was staring at the sun, reveling in the apocalyptic thrill of watching the moon temporarily extinguish our life source altogether." And much like with RFK Funeral Train, this kind of came out of a charged political moment. It seems like ancient history now, but this was just a week or so after the white supremacist rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, that caused a lot of political tension, and so it was kind of a charged moment, much like the assassination of RFK in 1968. I should mention just the origins of this book in terms of how it was published. So this is actually published by TBW. They used to do these series of books each year that was like a group of 4 books, a box set basically of books by different photographers, all released together. I don't think that they do them anymore. So this is kind of one of these like slightly under the radar books in terms of Gregory Halpern's own work. Kind of like with the funeral train progression from New York to Washington and the movement from day to night, Similarly, an eclipse has that same thing of kind of a beginning, a middle, and an end. There's the kind of anticipation, waiting for it to happen, then there's the actual moment when the sun is blocked, and then there's sort of the aftermath. And the sequencing of this book doesn't exactly follow that in linear order, but the pictures still speak to that progression of time and that arc. All right, so let's take a look. So immediately as we open it up, instead of seeing an eclipse, we're seeing a person. And there's this interesting ambiguity where immediately it's kind of like unsettling, and there's a tension because we don't know, is this person in despair? Are they blocking their eyes to try to be able to look at the eclipse? Like, what, what's sort of happening? And then you have this like beautiful hair, and this kind of strange light. And like, so already from the first picture, it's obvious that this is not just going to be a straight book about, the progression of an eclipse. After that opening picture, we have the title page. And then immediately we move into a detail that's, not specifically related to the eclipse. So throughout the book, it's not a one-to-one thing, but there's going to be this kind of back and forth alternation between the actual event, the eclipse itself, or what the sun and moon are doing, and then the reaction of the people. A lot like RFK Funeral Train, there's this sense of watching the watchers, and yet in this case we actually get to also see what they're looking at, presumably what they're looking at. Whereas with the Funeral Train, it's interesting, you actually don't see at any moment what they're looking at, you only see the people watching. So some of these, I'm assuming this is like taken through a piece of plastic or glasses or something that kind of, same thing you would look at the eclipse through. But what's interesting here is, much like RFK Funeral Train, I feel like the light is telling a lot of the story, or at least creating a lot of the atmosphere. There's something really specific if you've ever seen a total eclipse. There's something very odd and specific about the light. When the sun is blocked out, you still have that like crisp light and sharp light of the daytime, and yet the actual intensity of the light, the luminosity, is so much lower. Like, it's dark, and yet it's not like nighttime kind of hazy light or like dusk. It's its own thing. It's completely unique. And even though this is taken through something, you immediately get that sense. And I think looking at a lot of these pictures, I'm struck by what the light is doing. And then it alternates between photos that are not taken in the middle of the eclipse that have kind of a more normal light that you would expect. This sort of has that odd light, the way that the shadows are still sharp, and yet that sky is quite deep and dark in color, which is sort of unusual. So this is an interesting spread. You have the sun over here again through something shading it so that you can actually see the sky and the sun at the same time, the way that you might be looking through those eclipse glasses. And then on this side you have the actual shaded dark landscape during the eclipse, and yet the thing that immediately pops out is the McDonald's arches here. So I think another thing that's unique about this project and this body of work, again, like RFK Funeral Train, there's a specificity to it of the details, but it's also this contrast between kind of these mundane details, this mundane environment. I mean, he's kind of just on one of these roads where there's fast food, and this cosmic event. So this picture is really interesting. The prosthetic hook hands. Halpern has this way of zeroing in on these details that are kind of a little bit unsettling and dark and sort of scary. And of course, I mean, this is just this person's prosthetic, but for those of us who aren't used to looking at it, I feel like there's something kind of ominous about, especially this kind of old style, like hook hand, and yet at the same time it's juxtaposed with this like extremely ordinary thing of the, gas station or convenience store, like, slushy or soda that this person is drinking. And it really has nothing to do directly with the eclipse, and yet it's like such an evocative and specific detail. It kind of brings you like into this world that he's creating. So this is interesting, this before and after of Band-Aids. And again, it's the unsettling detail. It's not just any wound, it's slit wrists and all that implies. And then these like tender hands, this gesture of the person bandaging them. And then you see afterwards when they're bandaged and taken care of a little bit. Now again, what does this have to do with an eclipse? Again, there's this contrast between this like cosmic huge event and then sort of our ordinary lives, and the eclipse, which is not just a cosmic event, but like an ominous cosmic event, one that in ancient times, people didn't know if the world was ending or what the eclipse signified. It seemed like something very ominous and scary, this thought that maybe the sun's not going to come back. And to juxtapose that with these like mundane yet tragic details of our daily lives, of these people in this kind of ordinary yet sort of broken place. It's really interesting. Beautiful gesture here. Love the way that this guy's arms are folded. All the wrinkles and folds in his suit are really cool. Again, that eclipse light where it's like sharp, hard-edged light, yet very dark. Beautiful picture. I love this guy who's sort of like in among the plants and flowers. And just a very interesting pairing of this. And he's not looking up at the eclipse, he's looking at the camera. He's engaging with the viewer, and then another glimpse of what it is that we're actually looking at. Now, one thing that's kind of a source of tension in Halpern's work that's really interesting, in several of his projects, he definitely is engaging with and photographing people who, at least, on the surface, what you see in the photo might seem like they're probably down and out. This guy who's covering his eyes with just like a ragged plastic bag. This looks like one of those picnic tables that's outside a gas station or convenience store. He's drinking a beer here. And I think sometimes photographing people that are down and out can seem, especially, you're this hotshot magnum photographer coming down here, it can seem sort of exploitative, or at least it can be perceived that way. Of course, I don't know, the exact nature of his engagement with these people at the time. But I think at least here it's serving a purpose. And again, it's this contrast between this like cosmic event, this thing that's bigger than all of us, and then just the sort of like mundane reality of, worldly decay and the struggles of ordinary people, and the way that this event kind of puts us all in the same position. Like we all need that sun, like we all need it to come back after the moon goes away. Without that, none of us are in a position to do anything. So it's an interesting ethical question, and not one that I'm necessarily going to be able to answer one way or the other, but I do think that there is something really interesting in this body of work about who he's sort of viewing the eclipse with and where he is. This guy shows up again, same one that was there earlier. And again, he's not, actually engaging with the eclipse, but in this moment of sort of connecting to the universe connecting to a natural event, like we see a much more kind of common connection to a natural event or a natural thing, just smelling a flower. And in a way, it's like the eclipse, we're sort of all taking a moment to stop what we're doing and smell the flowers together. And you know, that idea that Halpern talks about that we're all in this together, that this event reminds us that, you know, we're one Earth, we're one country. And once again, like RFK Funeral Train, there's a level of detail and specificity of these images that I think then generates an emotional connection. And that's what makes it just more than about an eclipse. You know, it's not about August 21st, 2017. Like, it is about our relationship with each other, our relationship with nature, and with this subtext of this kind of, you know, upheaval and conflict and political charge underneath it, that you may or may not, you know, necessarily read into it if you're just encountering this book. It doesn't talk about the date anywhere. If you know about it, that may add something to the reading of the work. If you don't know about it, I think the work is just as powerful. But I think it's by going in, you know, finding these details, finding these specifics, that is what allows the project to transcend just being about that day, about the eclipse, and into something more that's long-lasting and that we can all kind of get something out of. So there you have it. RFK Funeral Train by Paul Fusco, Confederate Moons by Gregory Halpern, 2 photo books where all of the work was made in the span of a single day. And yet both books that I think talk about more universal themes and ideas and have impact beyond just depicting or showing what happened on the day that they were made. All right, and that's it for this first video. So thank you so much for watching. I hope this was enjoyable and informative. And if you're watching, please leave a comment and let me know what you thought. Let me know any ways I might be able to change or make these better in the future. Also, if you have any other books or projects that you know about that were also made in a day, I'd be really curious to hear about them. And I already have the idea for the next video, which I think is going to be the direct opposite of this. But anyway, thank you so much, and I'll see you soon.